1945 by some guys who were just looking for good dirt, and they found this clay pot with some ancient manuscripts, and we have been studying this now since 1945, and it's in book form in several translations, and the one we were reading has commentary in the back. I was talking to somebody, she said, you know, I'm having a really hard time with this book. I said, well, where are you reading, from the front? Yeah. Well, no, start in the back, and then it will be much more fun. So if you haven't read the book yet, I still think it's a good book, even though we're making the focus. I was really struck by what Anna read this morning. One of our goals of the spiritual path is to recognize the voice of the ego mind and the voice of God. Is that not true? It's a big deal. It's really a big deal. And I want to kind of tie up a few things from the past that we've been talking about the last few weeks. Last week I talked about suffering. And suffering, I think, has two forms. Basically, you have the unnecessary suffering and the necessary suffering. If you think about a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, I can't imagine that that process is not without suffering for the caterpillar. Just think about it. You eat until you about explode, which that might be fun, it might not be. And then you wrap yourself up in a place where you can be immobile for a good part of the year, and then you dissolve into a liquid. Now, how many of us would just say, have at it, take my body, make me into a goo, I expect good things to come out on the backside? We don't. We like the idea of being a butterfly, but we don't like the idea of being goo, right? And so that is our necessary suffering, the becoming the goo. That's the problem. Our resistance to becoming the goo is the unnecessary stuff. And in this day and age in which you can have distractions of multiple screens and something in your ear playing music all the time, or different chemicals that you can ingest so that you don't have to experience the suffering, we have done a really good job of trying to hide the suffering of life from ourselves, being completely distracted or being chemically induced to feeling a different state, which only breeds to it unnecessary suffering that comes with the delay of experiencing the transformation we're about. And so instead of moving seamlessly through life from one suffering to one butterfly event to one suffering to one butterfly event, we can delay it by not paying attention or by dumbing ourselves down. And who hasn't done both of those, right? But that is not your fastest path through this process. It tends to slow it down, not make it better. So if you're suffering grief or loss, it's probably better to go ahead and suffer grief and loss than it is to try to hide from it some way, some distraction or some drug. Up to a point, of course, then there needs to be some relief from that. I mean, I'm not saying just wallow in it until you turn into a puddle of goo, but do your best to experience it, being skillful in your management of your suffering in that way. But go ahead and have the experience, skillfully know when to back out, when to join a distraction, to perhaps even take a chemical to change it, but then come back and do your work and then be skillful about it. Don't just be afraid of it. Let yourself be bigger than that. And part of that being bigger than that is the real course of spiritual development, is becoming bigger than you were. And essentially what we're doing is we're suffering when we're changing or losing some part of our identity that we've had and held tight. And if that was that you were married and with somebody and then now you're no longer, and that was your definition of yourself, well, now you are kicked out of that like you were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And now it is time for you to go and find out who you really are, independent of that relationship. And that is often suffering. But it leads to, if done skillfully, it leads to a bigger life. And so it is with your body. You know, as your body gets older, at some point it ceases to be that lithe, athletic thing it once was, and becomes closer to inert. So our definition of who we are could go down, down, down with it, or it could go away from it. And it could cease to be who we think we are. We could cease to be the body, the pride of our physique, or our pride of our sexuality, or whatever it is, can be replaced by an awareness of the divine aspect of ourselves, the transcendent, the non-physical aspect. That is moving from ego to the voice of God, moving away from being just a body and its component parts or thoughts that come with a mind that has been reduced to a single human being, and expanding out into something else. If you think about it, when you were a child, a little child is told by its parents over and over, you are somebody. You are this. You're this cute little thing. Or you're this bad little thing, or whatever they said. But they brought you into a small place. They made you little. They made you confinable and carryable. They could put you in their arms and take you somewhere, or put you in your room and keep you from experiencing the world. They could do this to you because you were now inside that body, and that's who you were. And that became your identity. And part of growing up is claiming an identity, of course, but it tends to be that we gave them a relatively small one. We give you a small identity. It might be why the Sunday school here is so interesting, is because while it's important to get that you're an entity, it's nice to remember something of the previous state of your existence in which you were not so small and tightly confined. And so this awakening that we do as adults is really a lot about letting go what we learned as children and becoming who we used to be before we got to be so little. I mean, you're really not just the body, and you're certainly not just the mind, or your ambitions, or what your job title is, or what your so-called relationship defines you as. You're not that. You're more than that. And that is the awakening to the God voice. The God voice that tells you, that is you, that has compassion for the world around it, because it is the world around it as well. The phrase we use here in unity, the first of the 5 principles about which unity is there's only one presence, one power, God the good, omnipotent. And God is good not because God is good versus evil, but God is evolving, God is becoming. God is still becoming expressed into this material plane, and that is evolving as it is more and more expressed into it. And so God is the good expressing in reality, in the physical reality. And there's only one presence. And so if you really think about when you take that, if you take that in, and I am still trying to take that in, but it means everything you see is an expression of the divine. It is God in essence, formed into something. But it's also, in this form of thinking, panentheism, meaning God is in everything, but also more than everything, that there is more to this creative force, this force called God, than that. And I don't really like to use the word God much. As you probably, if you've been coming here for years, you go, he's a little short on the God thing, isn't he? Yep. And here's an explanation or an excuse. Take it as you wish. But essentially, God is such a tainted word in a sense. God is, most of the history of the God thing started out as an idol. We had a location in the world, or we had a physical object that represented God, and our psyche confused God with something that looked like us, predominantly. We made God in our image as much as God made us in its image. And so we have this contraction of whatever it is that you would call the intelligence, the power, spirit, the oneness, the openness, the mystery, we have confined it when we say the word God into like something I can put on the altar there. And we have collapsed our consciousness that God is something like us. So I think really, I was talking with Brooks earlier, and Brooks said, I think our ability to understand God is a whole lot like a dog trying to understand calculus. We don't have it. So if we can just lighten up about our definition of God, then I think we would do better, because it is much bigger than we're going to be able to put into words. So two of the favorite ways of saying God in the mystic's point of view is openness or the mystery or the one or something without definition. And certainly to get away from that, rather than having to work through it every time we talk about that, whatever you want to call it, if I don't use God, you don't have to go through this evolutionary process of taking it from stone or wood into the transcendent, non-physical, beyond our understanding. We just don't use the word at all. Just jump over that thing. It's one more way of doing it. It's not to talk about it, not to use the word. It's kind of like jerk. Jerk could be a nice phrase if you knew how to make the person jerk seem like a nice word, but generally you have a configured thought about what a jerk is when I say the word jerk, and just like you have a configured thought about what God is when I say the word God, and let's just get out of that. It is more than that, just like you are more than that. So if you don't make God in your physical, emotional image, then you cannot be in the physical, emotional image of God when you were made by God. Does it make sense? So that those two are bound together and both need to be set aside, and a new understanding of who we are brought into the fore. We are not that, but we are that. So Yeshua or Jesus, is being asked by the disciples in the passage that Fran read, is asked, "Who are you?" And so the first one, Peter says, "You're a righteous angel," and Matthew says, "You're a wise philosopher." And so we answer according to how we perceive ourselves. Who is the Son of God? You are like me. You must be a righteous angel. That's how I would see myself at the best. Or you're a philosopher. That's who you are. And then he gets to Thomas. And Thomas says, "Master, my mouth could never utter what you are like." There's nothing in a dog's vocabulary to do the calculus, right? It's beyond us, really. But then in essence, if you are following what Jesus is saying through this gospel and the gospels in the Bible, is essentially that you are the same as he is, and he is the same as God. And so he is saying you are that. And you can't even say what that is in our vocabulary. And so we have this problem of knowing where we're going with this evolution of our consciousness into something greater, because we're a little bit lost about what all that might mean. But one thing it doesn't mean is that you're stuck where you are with your current field of dreams. It's more than that. And so the suffering that we're doing as human beings is the suffering of let us let go of it, to let ourselves let go of it, of being who we have been told as a child and lived our life from. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I acted like a child. When I grew up, I put away childish things. We see through the glass darkly. One day we will see through clearly. This is the transformational process. It's a mystery. It's a bloody mystery. And we're on this journey, and we have chosen to be here not because we are compelled by the church or anybody else, but because we are compelled by this desire to unfold this package that we are, and we don't even know exactly what we're doing, so we get around other people who don't know what we're doing, and we do it with them. And somehow it makes the journey more pleasant. There's a woman coming this summer, Ellen Grace OBrien. She was here last year, and I think she was here the year before. She's, I'll tell you a little story. So I was married once, and the woman I was married to was married once before me. So this is going somewhere. And then her husband remarried, and he remarried Ellen Grace OBrien. So it's really a family affair we're having here. So it's like But Ellen comes out of the Hindu or Vedic traditions, and here's how she sums up the Vedas, the ancient scriptures of India. It is, we are it, we forget, we remember. My work is done here. That's pretty tight. That's pretty tight, isn't it? It is, we are it, we forget, we remember. That's what we're doing. We're on the remembering phase now. So the first half of life, we're forgetting. And we're all about the ego. The ego, I'm doing this. And I walk even today, I walk almost every day of the week, into the forest, and I find myself listening to my ego make plans. What a repetitive job that is. I don't know why I take the job every day, but she, my ego, she's repetitive. She says the same thing over and over and over, over and over and over, over and over and over. Do y'all have that? Do you have one? Whew. Yeah, I just wonder, it's like I'm not going to live long enough if I have to, to get somewhere if I keep listening to that, right? We need a trick. We need something to break that pattern of thought. And that's what spiritual practice is. You do spiritual practice so that you can break the habit of being yourself. I love that phrase. Break the habit of being yourself, your small self. So at the end of the month, we have David McKay coming here. David McKay, as y'all might have remembered from last year, was the guy who wrote the book, One Open Door. We did the book study on that. We got books in the, if you want to follow up with that, they're in the bookstore. He's out of the Zen tradition. He was a Zen monk for umpteen years of doing that. And in so doing, he used the power of awareness, essentially, to penetrate through the suffering of his own ego and the causes of suffering, and began to see more clearly. And so he's really quite potent as a speaker. He'll be here the last Sunday of the month and do a workshop. So if you're interested, please come then. But one of the things I noticed about deep meditation is that essentially it does not let you off the hook of suffering. You sit with your suffering until you penetrate it to a deeper level of awareness. And so people who have practiced that deeply can be quite inspiring, because they kind of bring a taste of that with them wherever they go. And you recognize a sense of compassion and understanding that comes with someone who's looked at their own stuff long enough to have compassion and understanding for themselves, and therefore, when it is played out in the multiplicity of who we are, it is easy for them to have compassion and understanding for us. So I really like the fact that he's coming. But before he gets here, there's something else I also like, which is this guy, Richard Liang. He's coming from England. Richard is going to be asking you to have direct experience visually so that you might have a transcendent experience internally. And I'll walk you through the first of them. Now, most people, we're not going to have him speak on Sunday. Don't tell him this when he gets here. But he just launched into his little presentation that he does when he came here to speak. It was about maybe 5 years ago. No one got it at all. It was just embarrassing. I was just sitting there on the front row going, this is not selling. This is horrible. So I took over the second service. I talked for 10 minutes setting him up so when he did it, people would have a chance to get it, right? Because he's going to ask you to do something that you're not native to doing anymore. When you were a child, I mean, unconditioned into being you, you had direct experience of reality. And one of the things that you had was this difficulty in discerning who you were and what the world was out there. It was just one big experience, right? You had not been contracted into the body yet. And so what his way of doing this is to ask you to see as though you were a child with no history at all. Just direct experience this moment, right now, no history. No like, oh, well, I know better than that. None of that stuff. Shut up. That voice that says, oh, well, I don't think that's the way it is. I know that I have a head, because he's going to talk about the headless way. And the headless way works like this. You all ready? Here we go. Headless way. So at this moment, I'm going to ask you a question that is absolutely honest. Answer is no. Can you see your own head? No. Can you right now? Nobody. Nobody in this room can see their own head. Right? Anybody want to object? Okay, I got 100%. Now, when you don't see your head, can you imagine you don't have a head because you can't see it? Your direct experience is you don't have a head. You with me? Because you don't see it, do you? See your hands, you see the room, you see your body, you don't see it. Do you, as a direct experience with no history of being alive, do you have a head? No. I'm going to say that for you. No, I don't have a head. Wow, that's really strange. I don't have a head. Try it. Try seeing without having a head, without being a person seeing that, and just let all of this be your head. Right? That's the truth at this moment. If you have no history, all you have is a headless state, and everything is in it. Everything is inside whatever this headless state is. All you see. It turns out, if your direct experience, all of it is inside you, or whatever is experiencing this. Are you with me now? And this is where it gets tricky. That's the same as being awake. Ta-da! I'm enlightened. With one, poof, like that. It's me. I am that. Where the mind wants to fall back into its history of knowing things, if you can hold it out there long enough, it will begin to make sense that, oh my God, I am that. And it's a trick. It's a nuance. It's different to have no head. Not because you couldn't touch something there, but it's like, watch your hand. I have no hand. I have a hand. No hand. Hand, right? I love Richard. I think he's one of the funniest people you'll meet as a teacher. Anyway, he said, you know, when I was first learning this from my teacher, he said I would stand in front of the entrance to a bank, and he would go, see people coming into the bank, and he would go, they have no idea what's going to happen to them because they're going to cease to be, and then one day they'll come, then in some point they'll come back out, they'll be. If you practice only seeing from the innocence of direct experience, you may begin to see that you have no head in direct experience, and all that is inside you. I was doing the workshop last year when he was here, and one of the things he had us do was he said, pick somebody, we were in a circle, pick somebody across the circle and say to them, I'm headless for you. Now, when we did that, one at a time, Not everybody got to do it. But I remember a woman said to a man across the room, she was not related to him, she didn't know him deeply, I didn't think at all, but she knew his name enough to say, whatever it was, let's say John, John, I'm headless for you. It was the most deeply loving thing I think I'd ever heard. In that moment, there was no other, self and other. There was only loving. You get that? When you cease to be your separate little self and become the eyes of God, only I'm not using that phrase, the eyes of all it is, and you see it is in you, you are it, I'm headless for you. So practice this, if you would, please, in the next week or two. Just practice just being headless. Looking at the world as though you don't have a head and therefore no identity, and you're just experiencing that, and it is inside of you, because what you've replaced your head with is the universe. It's wild. It's trippy. It's fantastic, man. Come on, you have to cut down on your drug use and just try this. It is a trip to do that. And then you have like the beginning of that direct experience where you can go, the whole world is me. I see the whole world inside of myself. I remember many years ago reading about one of my, at that time, favorite gurus saying, I see the whole world inside myself. And I thought, well, that's special. You must be really special to have that. But no, I think it's right here for all of us. I see the whole world inside myself as me. There's only one presence, one power, God the good, and I am that. It's getting weirder, isn't it? So we're moving from the ego that was conditioned into us as a child, or maybe in the past lifetime or whenever. We're moving from the ego into God, or that. And so Yeshua is talking in this this logion, this saying number 13. And so Thomas comes up and says, Master, my mouth could never utter what you are like. And Yeshua told him, I am no longer your master, because you have drunk and become drunken from the same bubbling source from which I spring. Then he took him aside and he said 3 words to him. When Thomas returned to his companions, they questioned him, what did Yeshua tell you? And Thomas answered, if I told you even one of the things he said to me, you would pick up stones and throw them at me. And fire would come out of those stones and consume you. If you knew what I know, you wouldn't believe it. If you heard me say it and you hadn't had the experience, you wouldn't believe it, and you would be mad with me for saying it. So how many times have the prophets and Jesus said something, and they said, let's stone them and get rid of them. Let's get rid of them. They're beyond our understanding, which means they're wrong. So that you don't throw the pearls before swine. You keep it to yourself, except for when it's right to tell somebody. And when you tell somebody that it's over their head, they may meet it with anger. Okay. That's all right. That's why we're the best kept secret in town. Don't tell anybody we're here. All right? I'm going against the marketing program that we're working up. But just you can understand why there's not everybody in the world here, because what we're saying is that the 3 words could be this: you are that. You're it. And we are here to remember, even though we have forgotten. You're it. And so that's our job. That's what the gnosis is knowing yourself and being it to the best of your ability. Let us pray. What is cherished in your life that you would find hard to let go of? If it were not there, would you be okay? Would you be okay? You would be okay if you knew who you really were, not the body, not your story, not your titles, not even your mind, but that, a headless experience of the universe. Let all that has defined you disappear for a moment and experience yourself as the universe, as that, as the mystery or the oneness. God is. I am. I remember. At last. And so it is. Amen. We're going to take up an offering. So we have a phrase we say when we take up the offering here. Divine love as me blesses and multiplies. All that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Divine love as me is the operative phrase here. Divine love as me. When you're in that state, cool things happen. Among them might be that you expand, that you have what you really want, that as you give, you receive. That's where we're going with this. So in your own mind, hold what you are giving today and say these words, please, with me together. Divine love as me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. And now another experience of love in music.